Yeah, I just saw a short video where it was said, and this is a belief that I come across a lot, where it was said, um, uh, you are never a victim. Don't fall into the trap of feeling like a victim. Get over it and get on with it. And it was good for me to see this because I can feel where I stand in relation to that statement. Because on the one hand, that is true, or on the one hand, better said, from seeing it from a higher perspective, seeing it from the perspective of our soul, that is true. So it's the higher vibrational being that we are. And when we have opened up to our higher vibrational self, become aware of our true being, the soul that we are, then we can begin to see that. We can begin to see that by also understanding how that is. By understanding how the soul is orchestrating everything that we experience. And the soul has also made contracts with every single person that we encounter. I'm not going to go into detail. I'm not sure about, let's say, every single person we encounter, at the cash register, or people that just have no lasting impact. I mean, everyone that we have a relationship with, and especially those, but really everyone we have a relationship with. But I think the contract idea is especially with those that hurt us, that where we have really, really deep, that have a huge impact on us. And the word contract is used. I don't know how much of it is like a real contract, like, okay, you're right. But how I understand it is that we truly, before the soul enters the incarnation, it has this whole plan laid out, the blueprint of the incarnation, and it will, with other souls, it will get together and say, look, this is what I want to work on, this is what I want to experience, and also according to the past experiences of a soul. And this life is always about the growth of the soul, the evolution of the soul, the coming to a greater understanding of self, a greater experience of self, a more transparent, a more real experience of self, of who I truly am, of all of myself, but within the density of the physical body and whatever space-time dimensional vantage point the incarnation is taking place. So from that level of consciousness, yes, there are no victims. However, and this is why I was inspired to make a video about it, I hear this so often, like, get over it, you're not a victim, get over it. And that just never works. It never works to say, get over it. Because what that does is denying parts of ourselves, denying parts of ourselves that are at the level of our humanity, that are at the level of identification with the body, that are at the level of consciousness that are identifying with who we are as a story, as the story of the body from birth onwards, and all of the experiences that we've had since birth, and all of the conditioning that we have received since birth. And in the identification with that story, that's our human. That's the human self. That's the I, when we say then I, and we refer to that part of ourselves, of it's this feeling of I am, and then it's the body, the story of the body, all the thoughts and conditionings I have. And there's not an expanded, that's not taken into account anything that's expanded beyond that of, ooh, I'm more than that. So there are those feelings within us. There are those identifications within us, and they are represented in our body and in our emotions. So to say, get over it, you're not a victim, get over it, without not just understanding, but truly getting into, truly opening up to our greater, to an expanded consciousness of who we are, what's going to happen is we simply deny those parts that do feel like a victim and that do feel hurt and that are in pain. And what that's going to do is if we deny them and just, oh, I'm not a victim, get over it. Denying parts of ourselves is going to make what? That's going to, it is the same thing as, imagine, because every part within us is very similar like the parts without us on the outside, because the parts on the outside are, we are all part of the one life. We are all part of the let's just say one life. There is no separation truly. That is the illusion. So on the outside, we are all a part of God. I'm just going to use that word. And it is then similar if you deny a part of yourself on the inside. It is very similar, like a child, let's say, just an example, a child would feel if you deny it. You deny its existence. You deny the validity of its emotions. And that's what happens too with our children, is if we deny the validity of parts of us inside, emotions that we have, and their validity, then we will do the same in our children, and that's how it continues. That's why children oftentimes cry, because they do not feel validated. They do not feel, and when they are not validated, they feel how then the heart field, the love field between them and their creators, their parents, so that which they experience as their main, parents for children are a lot like a god in a sense. Like they have that, for a child, they have a similar representation. It's like the main parent is like the smaller the child is, just like it's their whole world. It's their lifeline. It's their lifeline, and of course, because a baby is completely dependent on at least one parent to take care of it. It is literally the lifeline, and that's ingrained in the cells. And also, if the parent doesn't love the baby, then of course the baby feels that, and there's also literally a greater chance of its body not surviving. And so it's a very deep-rooted in survival sense, how important the parents are and how important love is. And love for a child is literally, it's like that's their sustenance. They live on that. They live on that, they thrive on that, and they need it. So now let's go back to being the victim and getting over it, because you are never a victim. The way to get over it in that sense is to realize that you are not a victim, and that's the first step of that realization, or part of that realization that is absolute necessary, is that you acknowledge and feel all the places where you feel like a victim, and where you have felt victimized, and where you are hurt. That hurt of whatever happened to you, what another person did to you. It needs to be completely acknowledged and felt. That pain, that hurt, that needs to be felt. It is where no one was there for you in that moment, and you were cut off. That's your experience, was you were cut off from love, because that whatever person did that to you had their heart closed towards you and could not see you. And at the same time, you did not yet recognize your eternal and indestructible connection to God, to love, to all that is, to life. And because you were not in the awareness of that, that was the feeling, that you were completely cut off and thrown out into space, and that someone else did something very cruel and mean, or at least something coming from a closed heart, not from the opposite of love, coming from, of course, all negative emotions are based on fear, but some kind of a harsh, angry, hateful, or just contracted, lost emotion that is cold, a coldness, a harshness. Yeah, coming from that. And so there is this notion like, wow, with what did I deserve this? And now I'm out here, out in the cold, out cut off from love, because in that moment, otherwise it wouldn't have hurt so bad. You were completely focused on that emotion coming at you, that was victimizing you, that was attacking you, that was bringing to you a coldness, that was showing you the coldness of their heart, so you could really feel it, could really feel their cut-offness, because anyone who will victimize another person is coming from, is expressing a part of them that is feeling cut off from God, cut off from love, where the heart is closed. And so in that moment, that's what subconsciously, you're like, am I deserving this? And there is this question, what have I done? Am I a bad person? All children, for example, all children that are abused sexually, just as an example, there's a feeling of guilt. And I don't think it's only sexually. I think there is somewhere in the back of the mind, there is a feeling of, am I bad? There must be something bad about me, that I bring this, that I bring this for. Not, I don't think I think that comes in later. because also that's what the parents then, they say, oh, you're bad, or you did something bad, and I have to punish you, so that's it's the mindset, it's the belief, or the filter from the parents that is given to the child, because the parent projects its own what's happening in the parent is that they're projecting onto the child what they have rejected within them, a part of them that felt exactly the same way that they are doing now to that child. It is when they, as a child, were victimized in that same way by their parents, and that felt so bad, and that's being shoved down and disassociated, and then that's in the unconscious, and it feels bad because you're holding apart from you a part of you apart from yourself. You're creating within yourself a separation, which is not in truth. In truth, you are not, that you, in truth, in this body, this is very obvious to everyone, that within the body everything is one. Yes, it's all working as one system, completely interdependent. All the systems within the body, completely interdependent, and it all makes up you, It all makes up this, what we experience as me. And that is one. That is one. I mean, that's obvious. That's obvious. So we hold a part of ourselves apart from ourselves, and that takes energy, and it's held in the unconscious because it's so painful. And it will, the whole time, it's going to be as if it works against us, as if it's a foe within us that we're not aware of, that it's within us. But we're fighting against ourselves. I don't like you, I don't like you. You stay down there in the dungeons, You go to your room, and I'm closing the door. And the whole time, that part of ourselves that we have closed the door to is pounding on the door. Let me out, let me out. And what's that part of ourselves, how's that going to feel, It's going to get very angry at us. And it's one system or one way of describing it or looking at it is called the inner child. Because this all happens in childhood, as we are imprinted. And so at that age that happened, that we associated from when we felt so terrible. So it's like we're associating, we cannot process that energy. It's too much emotion, too much pain. We cannot process this. So it gets disassociated. And at that age that we were, that's the consciousness that we are holding down. It's like it's stuck. Basically, it's stuck at that age, at that level of consciousness that we were aware of at that time, that it happened at that age. So it's like a child in there raging, let me out, let me out. It's feeling alone, and it's getting very, very angry, very, very angry, and feeling really, really bad. Or there are different ways of coping. It's depressed and resignating and wants to die, or very sad, or all of these. The whole spectrum of negative emotion is there, and then it gets projected. That's the shadow, so it gets projected onto. Now onto all the other people around us, especially the ones that are close to us. And I was just in the example of our children, because that's where it really that's where it really comes out. The shadow it's a mechanism. We don't do this consciously. That's how it works. It's a mechanism, and it gets projected onto our children, and we treat them then exactly the way that we were treated. Maybe not exactly. Maybe usually what happens, I don't know, usually, but it can happen that it's in a softer way. It can happen that, what is usually is that through the generations, from generation to generation to generation, the shadow gets passed on, and it gets healed bit by bit by bit, because each generation afterwards has a greater ability to take parts of it and reconcile them and bring them back home and heal them, love them. For example, there's a generation, let's say of my grandmother. There was never the talk of therapy. That's very, very highly unusual for that generation to have gone to therapy, because that notion just showed up relatively recent in our history of psychology, and then going to therapy, and facing our emotions, and then with the generation of my mom, there's already this notion of therapy. My mom went to therapy, and so it's like with every generation, the system learns, on a collective scale. It opens up more and more and more. We learn about ourselves. Also, science is always expanding, and we learn more and more and more about ourselves. We wake up slowly to ourselves, and so we gain capacity to face also our emotions, and to face our feelings, and thereby by looking within and facing them, the healing can begin. That's when the healing can begin. Okay, so let's go back to the victim. Yeah, if we say, oh, you're not a victim, get over it, what that does is we're denying those parts, with those, our shadows, our shadow parts, the parts that are in pain, that are in the subconscious. And what's going to happen is, what the shadow does, this is a mechanism. As everything on the outside is a reflection of our inside. What we see, what is in our vision, what is in our peripheral, in our scope, okay, in our perspective, that comes into our scope of perception, everything is, there is a representative of that vibrationally within. Because the outside is a reflection of the inside. I'm not going to go into that more in detail, because there's a whole science there that can explain this. How this is scientifically, how this is the structure of life, how it works. However, even if we don't understand the science or know that this is scientific, we can actually, simply by observing, we can see that this is so. So what happens is, that which we keep in the shadows, that which is in the subconscious, it's going to show up. And that's all things negative, where we have a negative reaction to, that show up in our lives, people usually, and also situations. And the situation and the person, and the situation we're in with the person, is going to represent a very, we are going to have a very specific reaction. It's going to trigger a specific vibration and a way of reacting to that emotionally, in the how we think about it, how we perceive it in the mind and emotionally. Yeah? And everything that triggers a negative emotional reaction within us is triggering that part of us that we have not yet reassociated, remembered, and thereby healed, and received back into our system, opening the door to that child that is trapped and embracing it. You know, that's compassion. And once we understand this, we can have this compassion for ourselves. We can go there. And what it takes is, you know, we're so afraid of it. We're so afraid of it because there's this memory in that what happened, and it's so at the time it was so frightening. It was so overwhelmingly frightening that we stay away from it because we don't want to have that experience again of so much fright and such a horrible experience. But what it is actually is simply allowing those feelings and allowing the images and allowing the thoughts around it. And as we are allowing them, what is that allowing? It's already something we do. It's already something we do consciously. We allow. When we say I allow, that's already conscious. So we can sit there and feel it and experience that part of us that we disassociated from, and that was pushed away and held apart unconsciously when it gets triggered. So that's why every trigger on the outside is our opportunity to heal. And so every time something happens where we get triggered negatively is actually there to help us heal. So even just to know this, that's so huge, you know. That's enormous. That's absolutely enormous. And then we can use that moment, or after it happened, because usually in the moment where we get triggered, we go unconscious. In the beginning, when we understand this, you know, it's not like immediately, oh, I can do it immediately. It takes a while to to stay conscious in a situation when the unconscious shadow and the emotions therein are triggered. It doesn't matter though, because as long as, you know, at some point we will become conscious of it, of what happened, and then we sit with it. Then we have that repeated, then we have the trigger, and it's anyways, after that happened, the trigger, we're going to be like upset about it. It's going to go around in our minds, and that's what we can then use. That's what we simply then, in a moment where we are alone and when we are not distracted, we can sit with that trigger, and then we simply feel, and we simply allow, and that's the healing. And that's how we get over being a victim. By feeling all the parts within us that still feel, that have felt like a victim. And that's the work. That's the work that is going to bring us beyond victimhood in an embodied way. Because everything else is denial, and that if we're in denial of all the part, you know, if we have those parts within us, if we are in denial of the parts within us that have felt like a victim and that are still holding that energy, then it's just going to get louder and louder. the reflection of that. They are going to get, the shadow is going to grow. It's going to get louder and louder. And we are going to experience on the outside, it's going to come to us that we get victimized in one way or another. That triggers exactly that same vibration, emotional vibration that we are denying. And that's the true, that's healing. And when we own back, remember, receive the parts of us that have felt like a victim, because then what happens is that those parts, they come back home, they are loved, that's all they want, and they just let go, and they realize that they're a part of the whole. And literally what happens in the body, because the shadow in the body, that's also what causes illness. That's what's, if the shadow is not received, if it's, at some point, what we don't do consciously, emotionally, the body is going to express it in illness, because that energy has to go somewhere. It can't be held forever. And so that's where all illness comes from. It is simply disassociated parts of us, energy that cannot flow with the whole. And that is the embodiment of, then at some point we truly don't have that in us anymore. We don't feel like a victim. And that's the embodiment of this empowered state of realizing that we are not a victim, And with that, and that we have never been truly, although we have felt like it and we have had that experience. And with that total realization and embodiment of that, we of course come into the realization how we are the creators of our life. And that is totally empowering. Because we have, as we remember those parts back home, that's the power. They're back, they're connected back into the whole, which is connected to the true source. And the source of our life, the life that is here, the awareness that is here, it is not, it doesn't begin with birth and end with death. It is not dependent on the form, on this form. It is greater, much greater than this, than all the experiences of ourselves that we have in this life. And the life that we are, this power, this life power, I don't like to use life force, this energy, this consciousness, this aliveness, the beingness, the being that is here, that's our soul. And our soul is then again, has a soul. And that soul is again expanded. Like our soul is expanded, is more expanded than this body and the life of this body. The soul has had many lives. And then the soul has a soul that it wakes up to, and that again is more expanded. And this goes up the dimensions and ever more greater scope of consciousness, expanded consciousness, all the way through the dimensions in this universe, which in the form are 13 dimensions, and then are 12 dimensions, and then the last three are supposedly they have no form. And then what's beyond dimension is the no form, is simply this aliveness, this pure, this awareness that is in everything. Everything is aware in one way or another. Well, there's actually not one way or another. The one way or another, that's already the form. That's already the awareness through the form. But then there is pure awareness, that is when we go all the way back, that has no form, that is simply is.